Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about some popular romances that I hate. Hate might be kind of a strong word. I think dislike is maybe more apt for some of these, but I had a couple of things like inspire this idea. I was looking at a list on Goodreads of like the 64 most popular romances of the past 3 years, and I was like trying to think of a way to make a video about that. Like I'd already talked about those books in some of my other list videos, so it didn't really seem appropriate to make another one talking about the same books. So I didn't want to do that, but that coupled with a book that I recently finished kind of inspired this idea. The book that I finished last week was one that was highly recommended, highly hyped, kind of a semi-new release, but I have not heard a single bad review of this book, and I just can't understand why so many people seem to like it. And it just got me thinking about the things that I don't like in romances and the things that I do like in romances. So today I'm going to be talking about like 10 romances that I personally really don't like, and talk about why specifically I don't like them, what tropes that they fall into that personally don't work for me. So maybe this could be entertaining in some way, and then also maybe it could help you understand what sorts of romances I like and look for and recommend on my channel. I'm also going to be doing a version of this talking about the 10 romances that are really popular that I really love. That's going to come, I think, next month in June, and I'll link that in the description once that video is uploaded, so that if you see this video like, you know, a while down the road, you can easily find that one as well. So yeah, today I'm just going to run through those 10 books. I do have notes in front of me. I was going to do this in my like studio setup or in front of my bookshelves, but I decided it'd be more fun, more casual to just do it down here and get really chatty with you. First up, we have Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This is a book that I really desperately wanted to love. It was one of my most anticipated romances of 2022, and it was one that I just thought was going to work for me based on the synopsis, but unfortunately it just didn't deliver on that like summery rom-com goodness I was looking for, and instead felt a little bit like a glass of skim milk. So Book Lovers is about Nora, who is a literary agent trying to kind of pick up the pieces of her life. Nothing super dramatic's happened. She's kind of type A, and she's sort of characterized as the non-book heroine type. Like she's sort of a bitch. She tends to get things done, but it's all kind of a front for her gooey center. Her main priority in life is making sure that her little sister is taken care of after their mother passed away, honestly way too long ago for her to really be behaving the way she does. So Nora kind of has her shit together, but at the same time she feels like the relationship she has with her sister is kind of rocky, so she decides she's going to go on a vacation to North Carolina with her little sister, and they're going to kind of reconnect and have a really good summer together. But Nora ends up running into her rival, I guess you could say, at work. Barely a rival, really, just a guy that she had one run-in with and didn't enjoy his company, an editor named Charlie. And the summer is spent with Charlie and Nora editing a book together, and with Nora increasingly getting irritating and trying to get all up in her sister Libby's bullshit. It's kind of a mess. But obviously with the inevitable conclusion of the book, there are like sparks and juices flying, and Nora lives happily ever after at the end. Now this book, while a new release, is actually not the one that inspired this video, because I do feel like I've heard some sort of middling opinions of this book. Like there's some people that love it, and there's some people that are really not vibing with it, and so it makes me feel valid in my dislike of this book. But I feel like catharsis was still needed because this was so hyped for me. Like, I need to talk about what didn't work. I think the main issue for me here is immaturity of our main characters and the attempt at heartstrings being pulled on. Like, it wasn't a successful attempt. Let's put it that way. Now, I get the general appeal of Emily Henry stories. I feel like they do a fairly good job usually at bridging the gap between seasoned romance readers and people who don't typically read romance. There's enough there in terms of character relationships and character development to really pull in people who typically like literary fiction or other types of stories, but there's also enough angst, tension, and like a tiny bit of smut to draw in people who do typically read smutty romances. But I don't think this book did Emily Henry's signature formula very adeptly. Nora is consistently waxing poetic about the fact that her sister needs help, and her sister, you know, is young and impressionable, but her sister, I want to say, is like nearly 30, if not already in her 30s. She has 2 children, she's married, and she's about to own a home. So it's just so interesting to me that Nora is so hung up on making sure her sister is taken care of. And I think we're supposed to see it as this like heartfelt and sweet trait in Nora, like part of her gooey center is that she cares for her sister. But I think it didn't work so well for me because of the state of her sister's life. I understand like, oh, it's misplaced, and we're supposed to understand that misplaced attention and affection it is part of Nora's like weakness and part of something she's going to grow from. But it was such a heavy emphasis in the book, and I don't feel like it was resolved in a satisfying way. I was just frustrated the entire time reading about Nora treating her adult sister the way that she did. good. I get it. I have never been in a situation like Nora where her, her mother died and she no longer has anyone to really rely on, but I still don't think that her treatment of her sister was something that was like super sympathetic, even though I think that was the attempt. And like that alone would have been enough to make this book not work for me. Sister relationships in books are just challenging in my opinion to pull off, but I think for me, the nail in the coffin was our love interest, Charlie. Charlie was, and I really hate to like pull out an old metaphor because I know I've used this in another video similar to this, but Charlie is like a recipe that you try from one of those like online blogs, the kind that have like someone's whole life story before you can actually get to the ingredients list. It's like one of those recipes that you try because the pictures look fucking incredible, and then you make the dish and it has absolutely zero flavor. Like it needs salt, it needs seasoning, it needs everything because while it looks pretty, it really doesn't have any substance. That was Charlie, which I think is interesting because again, I think attempts were made to make Charlie someone that you could care about and sympathize with, and I just didn't feel that way. We had bits of humor, we did have bits of wit, we had a little bit of tragic backstory. I don't feel like Charlie ever got to a place of feeling like a real human being. He really just felt like someone that was meant to match Nora really well and not be someone who could stand on his own as a character. Generally speaking, if we're going to kind of get back to the whole point of this video, which is to talk about tropes and things I don't like in stories, I think this one really touches on what I tend to not like about traditionally published romance, which is just a lack of heart and a lack of intensity. I feel like we're trying to have these adult characters be mature and rational, and while like that didn't really happen in this story, we also just don't have a lot of what I think makes indie romance so great, which is that fiery tension and that fiery passion and that like Wattpadness, I guess you could say, that makes things enjoyable, that makes things fun, that makes you want to return time and time again. This is a story that I could read once and be completely fine never reading again because these are not characters that really like incited a lot of like passion in me, a lot of heart in me. So I just didn't love the story, and I think a big part of that too is the fact that I read a book that had a very, very similar premise not so long before reading this one, and having read that one and having that be a 5-star read for me made this one kind of pale in comparison. And it does kind of make me think it could be an interesting idea, could be an interesting video to give you some books that I really didn't like and then tell you what a good equivalent is that I did enjoy, because I think the plots and the premises of the two books that I'm thinking of are near identical, but I think that could be fun. So let me know if you want that and I will make that video because I have some thoughts churning and some wheels turning in my head. But let's move on to the second book. I've been talking about this one far too long. We have The Friend Zone. This one seems like too obvious a choice because of the really, really egregious like epilogue situation in this book that I think a lot of people don't like. If you look at Goodreads reviews, it's people that are either really, really in love with this book or really loathe this book because of the choices it makes when it comes to infertility. Let's put it that way. This book is about our two main characters, Kristen and Josh. They meet in sort of a traditional way. I think Josh is the best man at her best friend's wedding, and there's, that instant attraction, that instant like witty banter going on, but we find out pretty quickly that our main character, Kristen, is infertile and that Josh is really insistent on having a big family of his own one day, which makes this relationship untenable. Or so you might think. Skip ahead if you're not looking to get spoiled for this book, but Kristen ends up pregnant by the end of the book. Plenty wrong with that, obviously, but there's two main things that really get me and that really hammered home why I don't like this book and why I don't like books like this. First one, obviously, is that infertility shouldn't be a plot twist. It shouldn't be something that is easily cured in a story. I think if you're going to write a character whose main identifier is infertility, you might consider sticking with that and giving hope to people who have infertility. I don't mean hope as in one day you might become pregnant, but hope as in you can have a long, happy, fulfilled life without having biological children. One thing I think that gets overlooked a little bit is something that I see from time to time in romance, and it is perhaps the most egregious thing that I think you can do in a romance, which is to have two main characters who have incompatible life goals or missions. I'm not saying that people can't work out their differences. Obviously, there has to be a conflict in a romance for it to be successful. You want to have both of your characters grow and change. It's okay for people to want different things out of their life as things go on, but I don't think that sends a great message to people that they need to change things about them to be in a successful romantic relationship. I think the story could have been much more powerful had we had a hero who has no interest in biological children or who really just doesn't care at the end of the day. He just like wants to be with our heroine. I think that would have been much more interesting, and let's have a different conflict put in place. It just doesn't make sense to have the central thread of your romance, the central conflict in your romance, to be incompatible life goals, right? Like, you are in charge as a writer and you get to decide what message you're sending to people and what your characters get to go through. And I just think it's a shitty message to send that, oh, your infertility can be cured one day and you can end up with your dream man. Obviously, that would be amazing if that could happen for everyone, but that doesn't happen to everyone. And it would be really cool if we could have just a really strong model of infertility and of what that looks like, have them end up with someone who is supportive of that and isn't trying to change them and doesn't necessarily have conflicting like life goals. Yeah, so for me, whenever characters just have like fundamentally different ideas of what a good life looks like, I find myself really skeptical of where the story is going. And I say that, like, obviously both of our characters wanted children, but you get what I'm saying. It's not it. Next up, third book is the book that actually inspired this video, Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. When I tell you I felt gaslit when reading the reviews for this book on Goodreads, I truly mean it, because it was a book that I saw on a Kindle bestsellers list. I'm actually posting that video after this one, so if you want to see the top 10 best-selling KU romances, that'll be posted on Sunday. But I saw this book hyped on Goodreads, I saw this book hyped on Instagram, I saw this book on the top of the charts in the Kindle store, and I was like, this sounds so good. I love a good small town romance. I'm sure this is going to be fantastic. Wow, my reading experience was so vastly different than what was sold to me. This book is about our runaway bride, Naomi, who is going to live with her sister in town. Her sister like asks her for money or something like that and is like, hey, can you come to my rescue? And being the good twin that she is, Naomi decides, okay, cool, I'm going to go to this small town in Virginia and help my sister out. Her sister ends up robbing her, stealing her car, stealing her money, and leaving behind a niece that Naomi didn't know she had. So Naomi is left to kind of pick up the pieces and not only figure out what she's going to do after running away from her intended husband, but also what she's going to do with her niece. And the premise of the story is one that I was totally behind. I like when kids are included in stories. I think it's fun. I think it can add a good conflict and a good like heartfeltness to a story like this. It was pretty obvious to me from the beginning that this romance was going to be really heavy on the emotion, or at least attempt to pull on your heartstrings. It's a small town romance. That's typically what happens. And then we also have Knox, who is a grumpy guy in town. He's a business owner, and Naomi ends up going work for Knox. It's not like a boss office romance kind of thing, but she ends up working in the bar that he owns. And he's just a jackass the entire time. To be fair, I'll attempt to give this book some credit. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt because I was depressed, and frankly, I still am depressed. And I think that might color my judgment of the story. It feels like with like a really heartfelt romance, if I'm depressed, it makes it harder for me to sympathize with the characters. But I think regardless of when I would have read this book, like it's still probably wouldn't have worked for me. Now, my main issue with the story is that the character motivations in this book were so severely lacking. Naomi, to her credit, like, we do understand that she has a lot going on in her head and a lot going on in her life. She's trying to live up to her parents' expectations of her being the good twin. She's trying to be there for her twin sister, even though her twin sister's kind of an asshole. She's trying to be there for her niece, trying to kind of figure out what she wants to do in life. But I never really got a concrete answer to that question. Like, what does she want out of life? We know eventually at the end of the story that she does want to help her niece. She does want to take care of her niece and be the primary guardian for her niece, Waylay. I just never felt like I understood what she wanted. Does she want to live a small town life? Does she want to be a family kind of woman? Does she want to open a bakery? Does she want to be a waitress forever? Like, what does she want out of life? I never really got the answer to that question. And I know it seems like kind of a silly small thing, but when you're reading a romance, which is an interpersonal kind of story, I need something from my main characters beyond just like them banging, which is kind of all the story was. And I think the main issue there, right? Like the main reason I need to know what these characters want out of life is because how the fuck am I supposed to understand why two characters should be together if I don't know what they want out of life, right? They could be fundamentally incompatible. Like in the last story we were just talking about. What if Knox eventually wanted to sell all of his businesses and move to Vegas and, I don't know, just gamble full time? What if he wanted to do that, right? That wouldn't necessarily work with Naomi, or would it? Because we don't actually know what the fuck Naomi wants. It was just so frustrating reading that over and over again. Attempts were made there. I could tell there were multiple scenes where, you know, Naomi is waxing poetic, or like someone is talking to her about how, you know, you shouldn't worry so much about living up to your parents' expectations. And like, I get that, but at the same time, she never, I feel like, made progress and never really moved past that. I never really understood what she needed and what she wanted, and it was just fucking frustrating. And then on top of that, like something that I touched on with book lovers was that the characters were immature, and that really was the case here. Knox's behavior and attitude towards Naomi was just irritating, and it had no basis in reality. Again, we didn't understand his wants and needs. We didn't really understand where he was coming from, and so him just being a dick to Naomi all the time for no reason, unprovoked, unprompted, why? It wasn't cute, it wasn't fun, I didn't understand it, it never really got resolved in a way that made sense, and he didn't really apologize ever. I am gonna give Lucy Score the benefit of the doubt here. I understand kind of why people like this book, because it is a small town romance. You do have the grumpy sunshine trope, you do have, you know, like a kid to make things cute and exciting, and if you're someone who just like wants an easy read, I think this is fine. I just think it was way too long at 600 pages, and I just don't think that it was the best small town romance I've read. And after reading this book, it did remind me, again, of another book that I think does this whole like situation, trope, etc. better. Okay, next one is a tricky one for me because I don't actually hate this book. This is definitely one of the books on the list that I don't hate, but it has some tropes that I hate, so I wanted to put it on this list so that I could talk through some of those things that I hate. And it's The Spanish Love Deception. So this book is one that I have such mixed feelings about because I didn't personally really enjoy it, but I really respect what this author has done. I think she's really fantastic. I follow her on Instagram. I think she's awesome. But I didn't end up connecting with the story like I wanted to because of some big like no-nos that it did. So this book is about our main character, Catalina, who is an engineer, I want to say, and she ends up having her coworker Erin escort her to her sister's wedding in Spain. And that's further complicated by the fact that Catalina and Erin have sort of like an enemies to lovers situation going on. And I think the intent there was to have like a lot of angst and tension, for this to be this like grand, big, drawn out, slow burn enemies to lovers thing, but it just kind of fell flat for me. And I think the biggest reason for that was that I got a really bad taste in my mouth about our hero Erin at the very beginning of the story. And I know it's definitely just a me thing here, but I really can't stand when I hear a hero disrespecting a heroine, not to her face. That sounds kind of weird. I feel like I can overlook or I can forgive a hero who says mean shit to our heroine's face and eventually apologizes for it. What I really have a hard time forgiving is when a heroine overhears a hero talking shit about her and then we find out later that like, oh, he didn't mean it, or oh, like she misheard him, or just something to that effect. I want to be with someone that I can trust. I want to be with someone who behind closed doors when he's talking to his friends about me is saying only good things. And I understand that Erin and Lena weren't together at the time that Erin is talking shit about her, but I still just didn't like it. It really put a bad taste in my mouth. And also his inability to kind of stand up for Lena in a corporate setting, in a misogynist, like STEM field, really irritated me. Like there are multiple scenes where she is having to kind of face coworkers and face misogyny and he's just kind of like, whatever, like, you know, deal with it. And I just feel like there were better ways to create an enemies to lovers situation. There are better ways to create that sort of like workplace tension than having that be the main conflict. I don't know. I really didn't like it. This is a book that I definitely understand the hype for. I get why people enjoy it. It has like a Mariana Zapata-ness to it that a lot of people seem to go for. People love a slow burn. But that disrespect couldn't be overcome. And I'm sure like there's books that I've liked in the past that have had this and like not pissed me off so much, but this one's so glaringly obvious, especially again when so much time was spent on how hard Lena was struggling in her role and like dealing with the other people at work. Yeah, it irritated me. So moving on. We have another book that I hate for potentially strange reasons. We have The Two Lives of Lydia Bird by Josie Silver. This book is about our main character, Lydia, whose boyfriend, Freddie, unfortunately dies unexpectedly on her 28th birthday, and she is left grieving after this major loss. Now, in drug-induced hazes, Lydia ends up meeting Freddie in sort of this like fugue state, in this dream state, and sort of plays out the what could have been between them, what their lives would have looked like, what the progression of that would have looked like. I think she was thinking maybe they'd get engaged or maybe they'd get married, something to that effect. I think Lydia assumed that they would get married or engaged, and she kind of wants to see what that life would have looked like. And so, unfinished business, she goes into this drug state and does that. And then in the real world, as she is trying to kind of get her real life together, she ends up falling for Freddie's best friend, Jonah. Now, I love drama. I love drama in a story. Trust me, I do. This should have worked for me on paper, but it just didn't in execution. Now, besides the obvious that this book is more chick lit than it is actual romance, I don't like the obvious. And it was really obvious to me from the beginning that the author's intent here was to use the dead boyfriend as a healing device by demonizing him so that our heroine could feel justified in liking her dead boyfriend's best friend. I just feel like it's really cheap. I see this often done in love triangles. You have one really, really strong contender and then one guy who is obviously not going to be the guy. And it's like, why bother with this trope? Why bother with this book in general, I guess, at this point, because that's what the whole fucking book premise is about. But why bother with a love triangle if you're not going to make it equal stakes? It's not exciting. It's not fun to read about. I want until the very last second to question who our heroine is going to end up with and to question what a good life could look like. I think it could have been much more angsty and much more interesting to have both of these characters alive at the same time. And I guess that's kind of the premise of One Day in December by Josie Silver at this point. She is really into the whole like best friend's boyfriend kind of situation or boyfriend's best friend situation. I just feel like it's executed lazily, and I feel like it could have been so much cooler had we had maybe Lydia like dreaming instead of abusing prescription drugs to see her man, you know, dreaming and having these dreams where her ex is kind of haunting her and kind of having to grapple with the what could have been, and not having him be a bad guy in her head, but having to wonder if she should continue to go to sleep to try to see this man, or if she should end up with this guy in real life who is there and who could potentially be more compatible with her. I don't know. Again, I guess you could say that that's what the premise of this book is, but I just don't think it was done well and it pissed me off. So enough of the unevenly yoked love triangles. I don't like it. If you're gonna do it, execute it well, otherwise I'm out. Okay, so the next one's gonna be quick because it's been a second since I've read this book, and so I don't remember like the minute details of the story, but I do remember a couple of things that really pissed me off, so I wanted to include this book. It's Well Met by Jen DeLuca. So this story is about our main character, Emily, who goes to live with her sister after an accident. I think her sister like broke both of her legs or something. She's having a hard time getting around, and we have a niece who kind of needs help getting to and from school or something like that. I don't know, it's helpful for Emily to be in town, so one summer she goes live with her sister, and she ends up having to volunteer at a Ren Fest that her niece is wanting to work at, I guess. It's like a popular thing that the high school kids do. And so Emily's like, okay, I'll chaperone, I'll have a good time here. But she can't have a good time because this guy that she has to deal with is a fucking asshole. The hero here is an English teacher who has some ties to the Ren Festival, and so he is kind of in charge of it, and he feels really strongly about how it is executed and how it goes. And like, I wanted to like him. I wanted to like this enemies to lovers grump thing, but he was so rude to Emily and took every chance he could get to point out her character flaws that I just couldn't understand how he could eventually want to be with her. He's talking about how she's flaky, how she's flighty, how she's not a good person to work at this Ren Fest. He also talks about the fact that she dropped out of college, and so how could she possibly have any dedication to anything? I remember him saying something to that effect, and I was like, I'm supposed to like this man? Are you joking? Like, I think what I want to say about this one is that it's not enemies to lovers if the guy is just an asshole. It needs to be two-sided. We need to have two people disliking each other, and there needs to be like reasons on both sides. I cannot have any more guys that are just ruthlessly rude. It pissed me off. Just talking about this book makes me angry. Let's move on to book number 7, The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. Now, this is another book that I don't truly hate. I just really hate as a romance. I have bitched about this book at length, and I'll be honest with you, it hasn't gotten old yet, simply because this is a book that I so hotly anticipated, and it was a book that was like, it was supposed to be a 5-star read, right? Like, it was supposed to be a new favorite. All of the Helen Huang books that I've read have been like favorites of the year, and this one, no. This story is about Anna and Kwan. Anna is dealing with burnout after a video of her playing violin goes viral, while also dealing with some mental health issues that are worsened by the fact that she has to eventually caretake for her ailing father. Kwan is a beloved character from the previous 2 books in the series, who is described as being just really happy-go-lucky, very loving. He is the voice of reason and also the advice giver for a lot of other characters in the series, but he is done totally dirty in this book after he is given a cancer diagnosis, seemingly only so his trauma can match Anna's. Now, I'm gonna steal a word from my friend Erin, and I'm just gonna call this book what it is, and that is pitiful. This story was a pitiful excuse for a romance. I think as a story as a whole, I think what this book offers is original and unique, much like all of the other books in the series. I do think it's an important story. I wouldn't not recommend this book. I do think like it has merit, but I think as a romance, it is just so painfully lacking. I think it's lazy writing to give one of your characters' trauma to match the other character's trauma. I think you can have a character who is untraumatized still want to be there for someone who has been through some bad shit. I think it would have been much more impactful had we had Kwan's sunshine personality kind of be there for Anna and sort of just learn Anna and be there for her and understand her. And in addition to that, we have this issue where Kwan is supposed to be a character who's just loving towards everyone, and he is just looking for love in general, and he could kind of end up with anyone. It doesn't really matter. How is that supposed to be the basis for a good romance? Like, I don't want a man who could just be with anyone. Granted, I also don't want to be with a man who's like rude to everyone and only nice to me, but I don't want a guy who could just literally end up with anyone. Like, he could be happy with anyone. I want him to understand my unique personality and my unique traits and really be there for me. So it was like, let's give Kwan trauma so it makes sense that he would want to be with Anna, and let's also make him the kind of guy who could literally be happy with anyone. Good romance. Like, no, that's so lazy. It just doesn't, this book pisses me off. Let's move on to the next book. Book number 8, Bringing Down the Duke. Let me just be spiteful for a second. Like, I feel like I've been pretty fair for the other books in this video, but this book I'm just gonna be spiteful and mean. I'm just gonna do it. If a historical romance has an illustrated cover, or it's like a Regency romance cover where the heads of the models are chopped off, it's gonna be bad. It's not gonna be a good book. I really should have done my reread of this book before this video. I am having to reread this book, unfortunately, for a different video, but honestly, I don't think it would help me that much in trying to like articulate what I don't like about the story. The story is about our main character, Annabelle, who is part of like the suffragette movement in the UK. She's trying to make sure that women get the ability and the right to vote. Unfortunately, our hero, Sebastian, doesn't believe in women's fundamental rights. Swoon. Fucking swoon. This is just like that double whammy of disrespect and also having fundamental differences in how people should live their lives. And I guess you could argue, sure, like he does change, he eventually does believe in women's fundamental rights, but like, I don't want to have to teach a man that, and I don't want to read about a book where a man is taught that. I don't know, maybe if you're like really into historical fiction and you're really into that kind of shit, like maybe this is for you. As a historical romance reader, I just want bodice rip and goodness. I don't want a moral lesson, and I really don't want a hero who has to be taught how to treat women. So next. All right, I am going to add a book to this list that I think is a fairly controversial pick, in that some people really love this book, some people really hate it, so it doesn't feel super weird to be putting this on this list. We have November 9 by Colleen Hoover. This baby is a true delight for the senses. I actually didn't hate my time reading this book. I ended up doing a cat puzzle as I was listening to the audiobook, and it was dramatic and it was angsty and it was a hot fucking mess, but it was like fun. It was a fun time. Because if there's one thing that Colleen Hoover knows how to deliver, it is a ride. This book is about our main character Fallon, who ends up with some burn scars after a fire is set at her father's Hollywood home. Her father's an actor, and he is at the current moment at the start of the story, trying to discourage Fallon from going into acting because of her burn scars. She decides she's gonna move to New York instead of staying in LA because she wants to work on the stage. She thinks it's gonna be kinder to her. And before she does this, as she's at dinner with her dad, who is just being a dickhead and kind of disrespecting her, we have a random dude who decides to sit there and pretend to be Fallon's boyfriend. He sort of just walks up to the table, sits down, pretends like he knows her, and sort of throws some shit back on the dad and is like, you're kind of a dickhead, which is nice, delightful, we get it. And then every year on November 9th, these two people meet up again because it's like, you know, they have this special connection because he pretended to be her boyfriend. Now, I'm not going to spoil the twist and the details of the story because I just feel like you need to read it for yourself if you haven't already been spoiled for it. It is just, it's a fun train wreck. But the thing here is that I don't think that lying is a good basis for a relationship. That's a main reason why I hate mistaken identity stories. Like, there are exceptions to the rule, so it's not like I'm never gonna pick up a book that has a mistaken identity or has withholding of information, but I just think that it's not, I mean, how can you go into a relationship not knowing the details of the person you're with, right? Like, obviously things are gonna be slowly unveiled as you get to know someone, but having really fundamental things kept from someone else, I think is just, it's not the basis for trust. Like, most romantic relationships are based on trust and love and respect. Can't really have any of those things if you are also actively lying to the person that you're trying to get with. It's not a recipe for success for me. And I get why Colleen Hoover did that, because all of her stories have this kind of morality element to it. If you haven't been able to put your finger on what about Colleen Hoover's books does or doesn't work for you, that might be it. She really tries to play with morality in interesting ways, and she definitely doesn't like to tell you how to feel about things, which I do appreciate and respect. But in this book, I couldn't overlook the moral question here, which was, can you trust someone who has been lying to you for the entirety of your relationship, whether it's romantic or just friendship? And the answer for me is no. So I didn't like this book, and as fun as it was to read, like, I couldn't recommend this as a romance for sure. So anyway, moving on to the last book. I don't actually have very good notes for this one because I got lazy, and I just don't feel like I could really try to effectively write down what about this book and or series is not for me. We have Kingdom of Flesh and Fire by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and like, this is a story that I wanted to really enjoy because I like ACOTAR. I like the idea of a fantasy romance, especially one that like goes there with the smut, but this needs editing. This needs some retooling. This needed like a really strong plot put together, and like, I never thought that I would be saying that Sarah J. Maas is like the queen of plots, but wow, like, she really mapped out a 3-book series and like she stuck to that, and she made it tight, and she made it have like a nice bow at the end. What is this series, right? Because I read the first book and it is a little repetitive at times, it is a little bit confusing at times, but I'm willing to overlook that and read the second book because I want to know what happens, and like, you know, is there a threesome? And then in the second book, it's more of the same bullshit. There's like travel for the majority of the book. We don't get any reveals until the very end. Those reveals don't feel very impactful or interesting because there's no lead up to them. There's too much will they won't they with the romance there. I understand that it's probably challenging to have a hero and heroine get together in the first book and then carry that along and make it interesting for an entire, you know, fantasy book series, but I think that should be a signal to you that you need to retool things if like it's not going to be interesting when the relationship continues to like fall apart and get back together. Like, it's just not, it's not a good time. So the romance I don't think is really that great in this book. And it's not like there's one thing I could point to as in like there's gaslighting in this book and that's why I don't like it. It's more so the overall feeling and vibe of this book, which is like, it needs editing. It needs to be retooled. I just wanted to like this book so much. I wanted to like it. I don't know. I've yet to find a fantasy romance series that's really like totally worked for me, and I think this is like the poster child of that for me. This is like the most hyped of all of them, and it's lacking. It's lacking in the execution. I wanted more, and from all of the things I've heard about this last book in this series that has just been published, a lot of people are also getting or becoming disenchanted with it as a whole too, so I don't feel alone, which is nice, but I just wanted to like the series, and so that's why I wanted to put this book on this list. But that's it. Those are the 10 popular romances that I just personally don't really enjoy, don't really like, and those are the reasons why I don't like them. Maybe this was interesting, maybe it wasn't. It was just fun to get to sit and talk about books with y'all for a little bit. You know, in the comments down below if you disagree with any of my thoughts on these books. If any of these are your favorites, I'd love to know why. I like getting people's perspective, and I think it helps me better understand why books are hyped. I'd also like to know in the comments down below popular romances that you don't like. I'll be curious to see if any of those are like my favorite romances, and maybe I'll fight you in the comments. I won't do that, but I will probably heart it because I personally like seeing people dunk on my favorites. Again, I think it gives me an interesting perspective on a book, and it gives me a more well-rounded view on what the story is about and like what I like about it, you know? So that's it. Thanks so much for watching. There's going to be, again, the like popular romances I love video coming soon, but love you all so much, and thanks so much for watching, and until next time.